Huh? August. Because if you are hungry, I will have to give you a fish. If not, I will teach you fishing. That's it. So, we have been told that budget is a very significant annual event of a government. So too for the economy. But before we understand the impact of budget on the economy as such, let us understand what are the other institutions that will also affect the economy and how budget makes its impact. The Constitution has doesn't have the word budget. It has what we call it as annual financial statement. So there is no word budget in our Constitution. It is called annual financial statement, which is a statement of revenue and expenditures of the government. So when the minister presents the budget to the parliament, technically speaking, he is giving a list of revenues that he would raise and the list of expenses that he wants money from the consolidated fund. So that's all he does. But this is being done with lot of noises around. Lots of noises are made. In statistics, we call that as noise. Whenever a data is given, it is not very simple to look at the data and come to a conclusion. You will have to remove some extremes in a data. We call that as noise. So there are lots of noises about the presentation of the annual financial statement. For instance, the total expenditure of 2016-17 as given in the budget today will form 13.1% of GDP. It forms 13.1% of GDP. Can I make an impact with just 13 rupees and 100 rupees? My family income is 100, where my contribution is only 13. That means to that extent my impact on the family budget is so low, because remaining 87 rupees is being bought by someone else. So to what extent I can say that this budget would have an impact on the economy, on growth? That means there are several other things that can also have an impact on that 100 rupees. Whereas this budget would have an impact only to an extent of 13% of my GDP. So now, I make this point just to tell you, don't think that budget moves the economy. It is a significant event, I don't say no. But its impact on the economy should be understood by a simple ratio of total expenditure divided by GDP. This is one indicator to tell me quantitatively how much the budget impacts the economy. Now, if I consider the total tax revenue that the central government would raise, it is about 6.9% of GDP. So, it takes away 6.9% of money from you and gives back 13 rupees 10 paise. That means the remaining of about 4.2 rupees is what it adds to it. right? So it has taken away 6 rupees 90 paise, gives back 13 rupees 10 paise. That means I am getting back my 6 rupees 90. In addition, I get only 4 rupees 20 paise. So if I look at it in this sense, to that extent, the impact of the budget is reduced. What it additionally does, of this, if I calculate non-tax revenue, what is non-tax revenue? The revenue that we give to the government in the form of fees or surpluses from the public sector enterprises, so on and so forth, that is about 0.7% of GDP. That means if I reduce that non-tax revenue, which is also my money that I have given to the government for the services it has rendered to me, 5.5%. So even if that is done, then this 5.5, another 2% of it I am going to get in the form of disinvestment proceeds. Another 2% I would get it in this form. What is disinvestment? The gold that my mother gave to me. It is not created by this government. The government received that amount of capital stock from the previous government. It is not its own creation. It is something like I sell my hereditary property. So, you sell away another 2%. That is also not created by this government. So, remaining 3.5% of your expenditure. This is what your fiscal deficit is. That is the total amount of borrowing that the government would do. So, it raises tax money from you, it collects non-tax money from you, it sells its family silver, and it says that I make an impact on the economy. So, I am just giving you this exercise just to stimulate you to think about budget in a framework. What is the framework we need? First of all, there is a central government. It spends about 13.1% of GDP as public expenditure. There are state governments which are spending actually a little more than that. If you put all the state government expenses together, that's about 14.5% of the GDP. Now, who is a greater spender? The states. Then if you have local governments which spend very little, about 1%, that means this is the total size of public sector in the country. So if at all I have to understand the impact of budget on the economy, it is not the union government alone. I have to look into the combined finances of union, state and the local government, which is farther high than this 13.1. That's why we look upon to state governments for moving the economy. So the importance of central government in economic growth is largely reduced today than what it was 20 years ago. After liberalization, the central government in terms of contributing to the growth through its own public expenditure is largely reduced today compared to what it was in 90s or 80s. We have largely a transformed economy today, and mainly because it reflects that our federalism has changed into a different setup, and because of which the combined finances is much large than the union government finances. How the economy is actually moved? Economy is moved partly by government finances, no doubt. This has an element of impact. But in a market economy, there are economic policies that can have an impact on the economy other than the impact that annual financial statement makes. An annual financial statement is an outcome of finance bill to collect taxes and appropriation bill to spend. So this annual financial statement is dependent on this. When the finance bill is passed, the government gets the right to tax the people. When the appropriation bill is passed, the government gets the power to spend. So these two together determine this. But independent of this, government can create policies. And certain policies will have a direct impact on the revenue and expenditure of the government. And certain policies may not have such a direct impact. I'll tell you how. Suppose I have right to education, an act. It has an impact on appropriation bill, because I should provide education to every child that approaches the government for education. So when I have to provide education to everyone, every child in the country, to that extent I should increase the expenditure under the education head. So a policy that is outside the budget discussion, it can be created outside the budget discussion, but it will have an impact on budget. So this need not be said together with the budget policy statement. Similarly, if you have right to employment, like Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, that is an act that will have an impact on rural expenditure. If you pass the food security bill, then that would increase the subsidy amount to be appropriated by the Civil Supplies Department. So there are policies which are discussed outside the budget but will have an impact on expenditure of the government. Similarly, I have another policy about disinvestment, or I auction spectrum. So disinvestment or auctioning spectrum or auctioning coal or many of the natural resources will have an impact on the finance bill, because that brings enormous amount of non-tax revenue. The moment I get more amount of non-tax revenue, then I need very little money to be raised in the form of taxes. So it has an impact on the revenue side of the government, but it is a policy that is independent of the budget. So there are economic policies or legislations that can happen outside the budget but will have a durable impact on the revenue and expenditure of the government. On the other hand, I have policies which are mostly regulatory. For instance, just now we were discussing the real estate bill. So real estate bill is a regulatory system which regulates how flats will have to be promoted. Now that makes the real estate market much more fair than what it is today. If any market becomes fair, to that extent, that market becomes very, very vibrant, and that contributes to the economy, but doesn't contribute to annual financial statement. Or if you make a very strict regulations about stock trading through SEBI, that makes financial system much more smoother. Or if RBI plays a role in terms of stabilizing the exchange rate or reducing inflation, to that extent it may not have a direct impact on the financial annual financial statement, but contributes a lot more to the growth of the economy. So the growth of the economy is not dependent fully on this annual financial statement that is being presented every year. And this annual financial statement itself is not an outcome of the speech that he makes, because there are so many things that happen outside the speech or outside the budget process that will have an impact on the annual financial statement. And there are certain other policies which will not have an impact on annual financial statement, but which will have a durable impact on the growth of the economy, particularly in a market system like ours. So we should understand this entire framework in which we will have to understand this. If you have any doubt,